In this video, I'll teach you the opening that got me to 2400 elo in chess, a surprisingly underrated and underused weapon, and that is the Nimzo-Larsen Attack. This is going to be the first episode of a series on Nimzo-Larsen, discussing basic plans and ideas. Enjoy the video. As I said earlier, today we're going to be talking about 1b3, which is the Nimzo-Larsen Attack. And fun fact about this opening is that I made a video series on this about a year ago, and it was my very first opening series on this channel. So we're going to be redoing that series with updated quality now, and I have a lot more experience in this system, so I'm going to be able to teach you a lot more. So what is the idea of 1b3? So after b3, black has many options here. Black has e5, d5, c5, f5, knight f6. Black has tremendous amount of options. Similarly to other openings, you have a lot of options against e4 as well. However, in the Nimzo-Larsen, the setups are mainly the same. What you want to aim for is b3 and e3, and also putting the bishop on b2 to pressure this diagonal, and mainly the e5 square. So e5 and d5 squares are going to be your main focus points in this opening, mainly the e5 square, but also the d5 square is going to be the secondary focus. So let's say our opponent plays e5 here. We go bishop to b2. A very common way to blunder here is to play d5. I've had 2300s blunder d5. They played d5 and they just allowed me to take this pawn, and I took the pawn and then I went on to win the game because I'm just up a pawn. A lot of your opponents will blunder this pawn. Don't forget that. So instead of that, knight to c6 is the main move. Now we want to go e3. And from here, there are a couple of deviations. For example, one of the main lines is to play d5 and pressure this pawn, where once again, a lot of people will blunder e5 just like this. So always watch out for this e5 pawn because a lot of people blunder it. Most people are not going to blunder it, but a lot of them will. So instead of that, they will play a move like bishop to d6, f4, and as you can see, we are pressuring this pawn as much as possible. Let me actually check the database, like the Lichess database, to see what the most played move is in this position. Let me just put the settings in correctly. Okay, apparently f6 is the most played move here, and the thing about f6 is that now you can go queen to h5, g6, and then queen h4, and this inclusion of g6 weakens f6, weakens this diagonal just a little bit more. So what I want you to notice is that everything in this position is about weakening this diagonal. And this is a very nice line. This can be even further illustrated in the d5 systems. So let's say our opponent does not go e5, instead they choose d5. So in these positions, we're still going to go bishop to b2. A lot of them will go c5 because the d and c pawns go together. So a lot of them will do something like this, and they will even go knight to c6. And in these situations, you want to pin this knight. So in a lot of lines, as you can see, we are trying to pin this knight over here, and we're trying to actually exchange our light square bishop for this knight on c6. The positions are going to be closed, so the bishop pair is not going to matter as much for the black pieces, or we're trying to keep the position closed. So bishop to b5 is going to be a very, very common idea. Don't go bishop to b5 in positions like this. If they play something random, like let's say something like this, we will talk about all of these systems in future videos. But in these positions, you don't want to go bishop to b5 because a very simple c6 just kicks you back and you just lost the tempo for no reason. So you don't want to be giving a check if you can be blocked with a pawn. However, in this situation right here, the knight's already on c6, so we want to pin it with bishop to b5. And a very common mistake, I don't even want to call this a mistake because it is technically a theoretical idea, but I don't really like it for the black pieces. So in a lot of these positions, people play moves like knight to f6, or they play moves like e6. And let's say they play e6. Against this, you have two options. You can simply continue developing with something like knight to f3, but what I would recommend is to actually capture on c6 right away. And the reason for that is because we're damaging the structure, and this structure is going to be bad in the long run. Typically, you want to wait for black to provoke you with something like a6 in order to take on c6, because then this is a waste of a move. But after doing tremendous amount of analysis, I've realized that if you take and you can damage the structure, you should do it even if you are not provoked with a6, because this structure is going to be bad in the long run. And the reason for that is because you are going to be disallowing this c4 pawn break. When the pawns are not doubled, when you have a typical structure with the black pieces, let me just go something like this, your way of creating counterplay in these positions in the future is by pushing b5 and then pushing c4. The c4 pawn break is a necessary pawn break in the future, not right away, mind you, but this is the idea for the black pieces. Like for example, knight e5, rook to c8, and if you take on c6 and then you castle, you get into a position like this, for example, knight to d2, and in a lot of these lines, b5 is a very common idea in order to go c4. So this is something that you have to watch out for. e5 is also an idea. So there are multiple ideas and multiple plans here that you can go for with the black pieces. But if the pawns are doubled, you cannot execute c4 as well, because the pawn is on c6. It's not on b7. So let me just go back to this position right here. Let me just circle all the way back to this position. But now you don't have a b pawn anymore. You cannot play b5. That means that you cannot support c4 with this pawn right here. And this just makes the position significantly more difficult to play for the black pieces, and it is just a huge headache because you cannot execute this c4 pawn break. Now I'm going to go into more detail about this in the future episodes. However, right now let's sort of focus on the basics. We don't have to go into too many details here, but I will definitely be covering all of the systems. I'm going to be covering the e5 systems, the d5 systems, other sidelines as well. I'm going to be covering all of them in separate videos. Even knight f6, this is also a very common setup, and here you have multiple options. You can go knight f3 and develop normally, or you can take on f6, which is not objectively the best way to play. However, it is a lot of fun, and I've won a lot of blitz games and bullet games with something like, in bullet they usually go bishop g7, they blundered the bishop too, so this can happen quite a bit. Also, today this is going to be an introductory video. I'm just going to be telling you what you should be focusing on the Nimzo-Larsen, which are the e5 and d5 squares. We just went over sort of the basics, but in future videos we're going to be covering the e5 systems, the d5 systems. All of these systems are going to be covered in depth. So I hope that you enjoyed this video, and definitely stay tuned. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss this series, and we're going to be having a lot of fun.